The radio crackled with static as the patrol car drove down the empty road. Officer Daniel Morera gripped the steering wheel, feeling the tension in his shoulders. The darkness around him seemed thicker here, like the night itself was trying to avoid this place. Sal Bartolomeu State Prison was known as one of the most secure and secretive in the country. Situated in a remote area, surrounded by miles of forest and swamps, it was the final stop for criminals the system didn't want back in society. But according to rumors, some of the inmates hadn't committed regular crimes at all. The transfer had been sudden. With little explanation, his superiors simply said they needed someone with his experience for the job. "It's a quiet assignment," they assured him. "Just follow the rules." When Daniel arrived at the entrance gate, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The prison loomed like a concrete monster, with watchtowers that seemed to be guarding more than just the prisoners. The air felt heavy, and the spotlights illuminated the walls as if trying to keep something inside. He parked and walked to the reception, where he was greeted by Officer Rodriguez, a tall man with deep-set eyes and pale skin. He didn't smile or bother with pleasantries. "You're Morera?" he asked in a dry tone. "Yes." Rodriguez glanced at his watch. 11:48 p.m. "Take this." He handed over a brown envelope. "Here are the rules. Read them and follow them all." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Since when did prisons have secret rules? But he took the envelope and opened it, a slight discomfort creeping in as he saw the list. The rules were simple but strange. 1. Never look directly at cell 13 after 3 a.m. 2. If a prisoner not on the inmate list talks to you, ignore them. 3. If you hear your name being called in the empty hallways, keep walking. Don't stop. 4. Never eat anything offered by a prisoner, even if it's food from the cafeteria. 5. If an inmate says the shift is over, leave immediately. Daniel furrowed his brow. Is this some kind of prank? Rodriguez didn't respond right away. He just stared at him for a few seconds before saying, "I'm not repeating myself. Just follow the rules. They're the only thing keeping you alive here." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Something told him this wouldn't be a normal transfer. Daniel put on his uniform and walked down the main corridor of the prison. The concrete walls were thick and the smell of mold hung in the air. The silence was suffocating. He had worked in police stations and prisons before, but he had never felt a place so dead and at the same time so alive. In the guard station, he found Sergeant Vasconcelos, a veteran with tired eyes and deep dark circles. "New around here?" Vasconcelos asked, handing Daniel a radio. "Yeah, I was transferred today." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Well, listen carefully. The rules aren't a joke. One mistake, and you could end up like the others." "The others?" Vasconcelos sighed and pointed to a locked steel cabinet in the corner of the room. "Those who didn't follow the rules." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to ask what that meant, but the look in Vasconcelos' eyes made him reconsider. "Your shift is from midnight to 6 in the morning. Stay sharp and never get distracted." The siren sounded, marking the start of the new patrol. Daniel grabbed his baton and radio, then walked down the hallways. The prison had an old design with rusted bars and dim lighting. The smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with the sweat of the inmates. 1:32 a.m. He was passing the maximum security wing when he noticed something strange. Cell 13 was open. Daniel furrowed his brow. He checked the clipboard with the logs. Cell 13 wasn't occupied. But then, why was it slightly open? He approached slowly. The light inside the cell flickered, and the darkness seemed to move. His heart raced when he realized there was someone inside. "Hey!" he called out, pointing the flashlight. "Who's in there?" No answer. He stepped in slowly, ready to call for backup. But as soon as he put his foot inside the cell, the door slammed shut violently behind him. The radio crackled. "Don't look back." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. The voice on the radio was his own. How was that possible? "Just leave. Now." The light flickered more intensely. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The atmosphere felt colder. Something was there with him. If you look, you'll see them. And if you see them, they see you too. Breathing deeply, he turned slowly toward the door and tried to open it. It was locked. The radio crackled again. "Someone's watching you." Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. He wasn't alone. His instinct screamed at him not to look, but he could feel a presence right behind him. A strange warmth touched the back of his neck. The shadow on the floor had something else in it. In a desperate impulse, he shoved the door hard. It gave way, and he fell out, hitting the floor of the hallway. The sound echoed through the prison. The light in cell 13 went out completely. When he looked up, the door was locked again, as if it had never been opened. The radio crackled for the last time. First warning, be careful. Daniel stood up, feeling his heart pounding against his ribs. He had no idea what the hell was going on in that place, but one thing was certain. He had to follow the rules. Daniel walked back to the guard station, feeling the weight of something invisible on his shoulders. His chest rose and fell quickly. He couldn't shake off what had happened in cell 13. How did the door open? What was inside? Vasconcelos was sitting in the swivel chair, sipping on some cold coffee. He looked at Daniel and let out a dry chuckle. "You had your first experience, didn't you?" Daniel hesitated. What the hell is in that cell? The veteran stayed silent for a few seconds, stirring his coffee with a spoon. "You went in, didn't you?" Daniel didn't answer. He just clenched his jaw. "Yeah, everyone goes in at least once. The problem is who looks." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The phrase was exactly what the radio had said. Vasconcelos sighed and looked at the clock. "The count is in a minute. You're coming with me." The clock read 3:03 a.m. when they both left the room. The count was done every morning. The goal was to check if all the prisoners were in their cells. However, there was one very clear rule. Never count out loud. Just look and confirm mentally. If you make a mistake, keep walking. If you're correct, keep walking. But never stop. Daniel didn't understand why. But after what happened in cell 13, he wasn't willing to test the limits of the unexplainable. They walked down the dark hallways, flashlights in hand. The cells were lined up with thick bars and small numbers painted on the concrete. First wing. Everything normal. Daniel counted the inmates mentally, as instructed. Some were snoring, others just stared at the ceiling, motionless. He could feel Vasconcelos' presence beside him, both walking in sync. Second wing. Something was off. Daniel looked into one of the cells and felt a shiver down his spine. There was an inmate sitting on the bed, but something was wrong with him. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't blinking. His chest wasn't rising or falling. It was as if he was frozen in time. Daniel quickly turned his face away and kept walking. Vasconcelos said nothing. Third wing. That's when he realized a mistake. In a more distant cell, he mentally counted 3 inmates. But when he looked again, there were 4. Daniel felt a knot in his stomach. He blinked and looked again. Now there were 5. His heart raced. He wanted to say something, but the rule was clear. Don't speak, don't stop. He tried to quicken his pace, but his legs felt heavier. The air around him was dense, suffocating. 6, 7, 8. The prisoners were multiplying inside the cell. The faces were indistinct, but they were all staring at him. All of them. Daniel kept his eyes fixed at the end of the corridor. Vasconcelos was beside him, but he seemed oblivious. Or maybe he was ignoring it. When they passed the last cell, the suffocating feeling lifted. The cold disappeared. The air returned to normal. They reached the end of the hallway. Vasconcelos stopped and looked at Daniel. "You noticed, didn't you?" Daniel nodded slowly, still feeling his body tremble. "You just had to keep walking," the veteran murmured. He grabbed a yellowed notebook and scribbled something before closing it. "Let's head back." Daniel didn't ask anything. He didn't want to know the answers that night. But he knew one thing. Something was wrong with that place. Something that grew the longer you stared at it. Daniel returned to the guard station with Vasconcelos. But something inside him felt different. His body still trembled slightly, as if the sensation of being watched hadn't fully passed. The veteran slumped into the chair, pulling a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket. "You never forget your first count." Daniel looked at him, without responding. "You saw the prisoners multiplying, didn't you?" The question caught Daniel off guard. "So, you know this happens?" Vasconcelos let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course. Everyone who works here knows. The rule is simple. Don't react." Daniel fell silent. Vasconcelos took a deep drag from the cigarette and exhaled the smoke slowly. "Tomorrow, you'll understand better." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, the radio crackled on the desk. "Vigilance. We need a team at Pavilion 5. Problem in cell 44. Vasconcelos closed his eyes for a moment and sighed. "Damn." Daniel watched as he slowly got up and grabbed the radio. "Copy. We're on our way." "What happened?" Daniel asked. Vasconcelos tossed the cigarette to the floor and crushed it with his boot. Some new idiot must have heard the voices. Daniel furrowed his brow. "What voices?" The veteran looked at him for a moment before grabbing the flashlight and opening the door. "You'll understand now." Pavilion 5 was at the far east of the prison. It was a maximum security wing within the complex, housing the most dangerous prisoners. However, it wasn't just that which made the place feared. Daniel and Vasconcelos walked down the narrow corridor, accompanied by 2 other guards who were already there. The air was thick, hot, and stifling, as if oxygen were lacking. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Daniel felt a chill. Something was very wrong in that pavilion. When they reached cell 44, a guard was standing outside, pale, holding his flashlight with trembling hands. "What happened?" Vasconcelos asked. The man hesitated before speaking. I heard my name." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "Your name?" The guard swallowed hard and nodded. "I was patrolling the corridor when I heard it. Soft, whispered, calling my name. But when I looked, there was no one, just a prisoner sleeping." He wiped his sweaty forehead. "I know it couldn't have been one of them. I know." Vasconcelos glanced at Daniel before turning to the guard. "Did you respond?" The man's eyes went wide, and he shook his head frantically. "No, of course not." The veteran let out a relieved sigh. "Great. Then you can leave. Go grab a coffee and take a breather." The guard nodded, still trembling, and hurried off. Daniel watched it all, feeling the tension in the air. "Explain to me what's going on." Vasconcelos approached cell 44 and ran his hand along the bars. "This wing has a problem. Sometimes it talks to you." Daniel's heart started to race. "What do you mean, talks?" Vasconcelos looked at him seriously. "It knows your name." Daniel froze. "If you ever hear someone calling your name and there's no one around, don't respond. Don't even look in the direction of the voice. Just keep walking." Daniel approached cell 44, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The prisoner inside was sitting in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, mumbling something quietly. Daniel focused and realized the man kept repeating the same phrase, over and over again. "They know you. They know you. They know you." Vasconcelos grabbed the radio and said only one sentence before leaving. "It's all under control." But Daniel knew it wasn't. Nothing there was under control. After that night in Pavilion 5, Daniel started feeling a constant pressure on his chest. Something inside the prison seemed to be watching. The following days were relatively calm. but the sense of alertness never left him. He began to notice strange patterns. Never look at the yard after lights out. That was one of the rules. He thought it was a security measure, but then he saw. It was almost midnight, and Daniel was in the monitoring room. Vasconcelos had gone out to get coffee, leaving him alone with the cameras. That's when something caught his attention. Movement in the yard. He furrowed his brow. There shouldn't be anyone out there. All the prisoners were locked up. No guard patrolled that area at this time. But there was someone standing in the middle of the yard. The silhouette of a man, motionless, looking up. Daniel adjusted the camera, trying to improve the image. The man was wearing the prisoner's uniform, but there shouldn't have been anyone there. What the hell? Suddenly, the man turned his head directly toward the camera. Daniel felt a jolt run through his body. The man wasn't just looking at the camera. He was looking at Daniel. That's when he noticed the worst detail. He had no face. Daniel pulled away from the screen abruptly, his heart racing. It was at that moment that Vasconcelos came back, holding 2 cups of coffee. "What's wrong? You look pale." Daniel pointed at the screen, stammering. "In the yard. There was someone out there." Vasconcelos furrowed his brow and leaned in, looking at the camera. The yard was empty. Daniel blinked several times. No, he was there. A prisoner. I saw him. Vasconcelos set the coffee down on the table and stared at Daniel. "He looked at you." The question sent a chill up Daniel's spine. "Yes." Vasconcelos took a deep breath. "Then listen carefully. If you see this man, never go out to the yard. Never try to find out who he is." Daniel felt his head spin. "But who is he?" Vasconcelos took a sip of his coffee before answering. "We don't know, and we don't want to know." In the following days, Daniel tried to act normal, but he felt like something was off. And then it happened again. He was patrolling a hallway near the courtyard when he heard a noise. Footsteps. He looked through the small window in the door and stopped breathing. The man was there, standing in the middle of the courtyard, with his back turned, motionless, breathless. But then he started to slowly turn. Daniel jumped back, averting his gaze. Vasconcelos' words echoed in his mind. "If you see that man, never go out into the courtyard." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. He wouldn't look. The sound of footsteps kept going, getting closer, but Daniel didn't look. When he finally found the courage to open his eyes and peek through the window again, the man had disappeared. And the worst part, on the courtyard floor, in the sand, there were footprints leading straight to the door where Daniel was standing. After the second appearance of the faceless man, Daniel realized that his time in the prison wouldn't just be about following orders. Something inside there wanted to be seen. It wanted to be noticed. But who or what and why? Daniel couldn't sleep anymore. He started feeling watched all the time. Every empty hallway seemed to be hiding something in the shadows. The other guards pretended nothing was happening. Even Vasconcelos, who seemed to be the most honest about the strange occurrences, avoided talking about it. It was only when Daniel decided to dig into the prison's records that things took an even more disturbing turn. It was late at night when he slipped into the administrative sector and accessed the old files. He was looking for the man from the yard. If he was an inmate, there had to be a record of him. But Daniel found nothing, except for one thing: Cell 34. It showed up in several old reports. A solitary cell, decommissioned decades ago. But there was an unusual note attached. Cell 34 has been permanently sealed. No access permitted. Direct order from the warden. Daniel frowned. Why would they seal off a cell? More importantly, where was it? He checked the prison's blueprints. Cell 34 was listed in a section that no longer existed. The part of the hallway where it should have been simply wasn't there. It was as if it had been erased. But Daniel knew it was still there, and he needed to find it. The next night, he waited for the late shift. Vasconcelos wasn't on duty, which meant no one would stop him. With a makeshift map in hand, he followed the silent hallways. The prison was asleep. The only sound was the echo of his own footsteps. Then he stopped. The end of hallway B. There was an empty space where a cell should have been, but all he saw was a smooth, unbroken wall. A chill ran down his spine. He reached out and touched it. Cold, solid, but then he heard it. From the other side of the wall, a breath, heavy, slow, and then soft taps. Someone on the other side was knocking. Once, twice, 3 times. Daniel took a step back, his blood turning to ice. Then he saw something that made his heart stop. In the dim light, near the bottom of the wall, there were footprints in the dust. Bare footprints leading out of the wall. Panic surged up his throat. He stumbled back and quickly turned to leave, his pace picking up with every step. But as he rounded the corner, Vasconcelos was there. Daniel nearly jumped out of his skin, barely stopping himself from screaming. "What are you doing here?" Vasconcelos asked, his tone serious. Daniel hesitated. Telling the truth could be a mistake. But what if Vasconcelos already knew? He swallowed hard. I saw the records. Cell 34. It's still there, isn't it? Vasconcelos' expression darkened. He let out a deep sigh. You made a mistake, rookie. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. What's in that cell? Vasconcelos closed his eyes for a moment, as if deciding what to say. Then he opened them again and locked eyes with Daniel. The problem isn't what's inside. Then what is the problem? Vasconcelos narrowed his eyes. The problem is what already got out. Silence hung heavy between Daniel and Vasconcelos. The weight of that sentence throbbed in the rookie's mind. The problem is what already got out. It didn't make sense. How could something escape from a cell that didn't even exist anymore? But Daniel had already seen impossible things within these walls. And maybe he was about to understand everything. Vasconcelos finally broke the silence. I told you to follow the rules. You knew I was going to find it, didn't you? Vasconcelos sighed. Everyone who works here sooner or later starts noticing the things that don't add up. Some ignore them. Some lose their minds. And some, like you, dig too deep. A chill ran through Daniel's body. The man in the yard, he came from that cell, didn't he? Vasconcelos nodded slowly. Him and other things. Daniel felt a pit open in his stomach. What's in there? Nothing anymore. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Vasconcelos glanced toward the end of the hallway. You notice there's no record of any inmate named Souza, right? Daniel's eyes widened. The prisoner who kept talking about him. Yeah, that guy, Souza, he never existed in our files. Never got processed. No guard here remembers booking him in. A deep, ice-cold shiver crawled down Daniel's spine. Then what was he? Vasconcelos looked Daniel straight in the eyes. A remnant. Daniel's stomach twisted into a knot. I don't understand. When cell 34 was sealed, no one knew exactly what would happen. We just followed orders. Whatever was inside, it stayed locked away. But not completely. Daniel stayed silent, waiting for Vasconcelos to continue. Over time, things started appearing. Shadows, voices, glimpses of something that shouldn't be there. Inmates started whispering about a faceless figure wandering the yard at night. Guards started hearing knocking behind the walls. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to process his colleagues' words. They tried shutting everything down, but it didn't matter. Vasconcelos gestured toward the floor. What got out doesn't need doors anymore. Daniel swallowed hard. So, what do we do now? Vasconcelos was quiet for a few seconds before answering. Nothing. Daniel's eyes widened. Nothing? You can't fight it. You can't contain it. You can't exorcise it. The only thing you can do is pretend you don't see it. Like the rest of us. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "You want me to act like none of this is happening?" Vasconcelos' gaze was steady. "It's that, or you lose your mind." That night, Daniel returned to his post, but he could never see the prison the same way again. Every dark hallway seemed to be hiding something. Every locked cell felt like it held more than just ordinary prisoners. And then, that very same night, while making his usual patrol, he saw it. At the end of the corridor, the faceless shadow, the man from the yard was standing there, watching, waiting. Daniel didn't blink. He didn't move. The silence between them stretched into eternity. Then, the shadow simply turned around and walked slowly into the darkness. Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He understood now. The most important rule of all: pretend you don't see it. And so, like every other guard in that prison, Daniel went back to work, pretending none of it was real, even though he knew that, sooner or later, the thing that left the cell would return.